Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Sana MAQBOOL and you're watching Pakistan TV. Here are the top stories of the hour. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the big news, of course, with Trump's announcement of the 20-point plan targeting the peace and way forward for people in Gaza, and of course, what has to happen to the West Bank. There are a lot of significant points as part of this plan that we will be discussing further. There is, of course, a lot of international reaction to the story as well, including Pakistan's, and that will be an important aspect too in terms of the critical role that the country can play as part of this very important development, with, of course, the Prime Minister also expressing his own response to the matter, among many other world leaders as well. There is also the story with reference to what has happened within India. We know, of course, that Ladakh groups have refused to speak with the Home Ministry, saying that talks cannot be held at gunpoint, and of course are calling for investigation into what has happened on September 24th. Another engagement that is happening within India is that of a court ruling that allows for arbitrary content removal, something that Musk has responded to on X, saying that they will be appealing the order. These are the four stories that we're going to be taking a look at in the show today with our guests and analysts, so stay tuned. Is going to take a focus on what has happened, of course, in terms of Trump's 20-point plan. There are many key aspects of the plan, which includes reconstruction, an end, of course, to the ongoing military conflict, a ceasefire. That is very, very important. Humanitarian aspect of this is a key development as well as part of the plan. There is, of course, a complete Israel withdrawal that is also mentioned, a committee that is going to be chaired by the US President himself, and then, of course, the way forward also in terms of the rehabilitation and rebuilding of Gaza, and whether or not there is going to be any space for Palestinian authorities to exist, keeping in mind that there has to be an exclusion of Hamas. Whether or not that will actually happen remains to be seen, but there are a number of international reactions to this particular development, many welcoming Donald Trump's own way forward, and of course his own input in terms of what he can and cannot do, saying that the passion that the president expresses and his power to be able to execute that might enable the end of the suffering of the people of Gaza. This also includes Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's response as well, who is saying that this is, of course, welcome and that Pakistan will be playing its own role as required as part of this, and believes that the Trump administration will be able to fulfill this particular challenge that Trump seems to have been taken himself. There are, of course, key challenges to the implementation, however, whether or not the US domination of the committee is going to actually help, or should that be something that a more neutral body should take, perhaps the UN or any other international body. How exactly will Hamas be excluded from what is going to be the way forward in terms of any authority that actually sits down in Palestine, and how will a complete Israel withdrawal take place, given the fact that we know the kind of rhetoric and expansionist design that Israel has been following for quite some time now. It is encouraging to see that Mr. Trump has also said that there will be no annexation of the West Bank, but whether or not there will be a real end of suffering for the people of Gaza, and of course given their true right to self-determination and freedom, is something that remains to be seen. But we'll be talking more about this and exploring what exactly will this implementation be moving forward and how it will evolve in the future. And for that, we've been joined by political analyst Mr. Scott Lucas. Thank you very much, Professor Scott, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I want your take in terms of what Mr. Trump has announced. Of course, his 20-point agenda is something that is being welcomed by international leaders. And of course, everyone is for the end of suffering, for a ceasefire, and for humanitarian help in Gaza. But the kind of plan that Professor Scott, Mr. Trump actually points out is something that is really, really important to understand. And how exactly do you think that will be implemented?
Well, I think the starting point here is this is not a plan, it's a sketch. And it's interesting because I think a lot of the media have forgotten this, that only a few weeks ago we had a much more detailed ceasefire proposal that was circulating through Qatar and indeed through Mr. Trump's own personal envoy, Steve Witkoff. That would have been for a 60-day ceasefire, with Hamas staging the release of the remaining 20 Israeli hostages they hold who are alive, and 28 bodies. And in for return for that, there would be an Israeli withdrawal back towards the Gaza-Israel border. Now, the size of that exact buffer zone remain to be determined. But Hamas had accepted the proposal generally. Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't even consider it. Instead, what Netanyahu was pursuing was this overrunning of Gaza City, which is actually still in process. There were at least 30 Palestinians killed today, and the possibility of a long-term Israeli occupation. Well, okay, what replaces that? What do we have with this sketch? First of all, and I think we need to be clear here, this is an ultimatum to Hamas. This is the starting point for it. It says Hamas will release the remaining Israeli hostages and the bodies within 72 hours. Otherwise, in the words of both Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel will finish the job. They will overrun Gaza City and the rest of the Strip. And indeed, Trump today said Hamas have 3 or 4 days to agree to this. Otherwise, they will pay in hell. So it's like, Hamas, you take it or you leave it here. Well, what's the issue with that? Well, that's the second point about this, which is this is a very vague sketch beyond that ultimatum. Just to give you a few examples very quickly. First, and a small correction, the 20 points don't call for a complete Israel withdrawal. They just refer to an Israeli withdrawal to an unspecified place within Gaza. And Benjamin Netanyahu, very soon after he appeared with Donald Trump, made a video in Hebrew where he said the Israel Defense Force will continue to remain in most of Gaza. Secondly, the question of the aid distribution and how that's going to be administered remains to be seen. Now, the 20 points say the UN and international organizations should be allowed to distribute the aid without being impeded, but that has not occurred in the past. Israel has effectively had a veto power on the aid that gets into the Strip. Do we have guarantees that will not happen this time? Third point, I think a key point, is the governance of Gaza. This international board, which is the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair's idea, okay, that has no Palestinians on it. Instead, its chair will be Donald Trump, and they will have a stabilization force, a security force of regional international forces. But where will these come from? Which countries will provide these forces? And then when you talk about the day-to-day administration of Gaza, which will be overseen by this international board, we're told that it will be a group with technocrats, some from outside Palestine, some Palestinian technocrats, none of them from Hamas, of course, none of them for the moment from the Palestinian Authority. Well, who will these technocrats be? And will Israel have a veto over who is on this? So you have those 3 points for starters, and you have the simple fact, as Benjamin Netanyahu made clear in his video after he appeared with Trump, Israel will not accept a state of Palestine, point blank, or at least Netanyahu will not recognize that. I suspect Hamas has said they'll consider the proposal. They have it right now. It was given to them by Egypt and Qatar. They've said they'll take a few days for security reasons to respond because their negotiators are scattered after the attempt to assassinate them by Israel and Qatar. But I suspect Hamas will say, okay, in principle, we'll agree to terms that lead to a ceasefire, but we need further definition on some of these key terms, especially, I think, on the Israeli withdrawal.
Absolutely. And Professor Scott, you mentioned some really important points. And this is important, particularly in terms of what we see happening on ground for the people of Gaza. And I want your take specifically in terms of what you said in your last point, that committee that is being chaired by Mr. Trump and whether or not it will have representation of Gaza. There are concerns also that are being raised of a neutral body or a neutral representative chairing that committee. Do you think that that's a possibility that can happen? Maybe it's the UN Secretary General that can be on that place. And when we talk about the representation of Gaza and whether or not it will mean any end of their suffering, how do you think then this particular proposal of a committee actually overseeing or taking a look at what is really going to happen within Gaza is any different from countries, including the US, Israel, or others, not just enforcing or implying their own way of governance in Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the starting point for this that you asked in terms of the makeup of the board, I'll just say that I highly doubt that the UN Secretary General Mr. Guterres could go on that panel because Israel would veto it. Israel, of course, has barred him from even entering the country to have discussions because of their claim that the UN is biased against Israel. So I think, part of the reason why you at least get this proposed is the Israelis are quite happy with Donald Trump as the chairman of the board, so to speak. Now, in terms of practical arrangements, look, I think probably you start with 3 points that expand on what I talked about earlier. First of all, whatever arrangement you make for Gaza, you have to provide for security. Uh, that has to be premised on an Israeli withdrawal of some sorts, because an Israeli military occupation across the country is not a security arrangement under this international board, because most Gazans won't accept it, and it yields the possibility, as we saw in Iraq, for continued violent resistance. Secondly, you have to have the day-to-day needs of the people being met through a governing administration. You can't just sit there and paralyze that administration by saying, okay, maybe we'll have a few Palestinians here, but then the Israelis say, no, we don't like that person. He's just simply not someone we would work with. We need a definition here that Palestinians are going to be able to get onto this, who have expertise, who have skills that are vitally needed, and that it will be truly an independent body in the sense that you won't have a veto on them serving on it. This takes us beyond Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Let's put those to the side. Where are the responsible Palestinians? Third, as part of that day-to-day administration, you come back to the aid question. And the fact here is that Israel has absolutely gutted the aid arrangements, blocking the UN, blocking international organizations, setting up the sham Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. You have got to have those aid arrangements now. You can't wait for weeks or months to set them up because people are dying from starvation. 435 at the latest count. So, in principle, let's come back to this. I think we all want to see a halt to the killing. Absolutely. And anything that would halt that would be good. But unless you have a viable plan to bring that about, what's the default position going to be? It's going to be an Israeli occupation because the Israelis will say, well, there's no security, there's no aid provision here, so we have to be the ones to do this. I think Arab and Muslim countries, including Pakistan, have welcomed this proposal in principle because they do want to see this truly make an advance in not only halting the killing, but getting some Gazans back in their home, getting some basic standard of life for them. But I think the Arab and Muslim countries also have their eyes wide open, and they know that the tough part is going to be, if Hamas accepts this, how do we get to practical implementation of these arrangements?
Absolutely. Professor Scott, there's also an important aspect of how exactly will Hamas be excluded from any Palestinian Authority or whatever it is that we're going to see in the future as part of the governance structure of Palestine. And it's not just a bunch of people that we're talking about. Hamas is so embedded within Palestine and Gaza. How exactly do you think that Mr. Trump or other countries involved in this plan are envisioning the way forward of ensuring that that will happen?
Well, I'm not sure how they envisage how they're going to do this, because you're absolutely right that we're not just talking about like a small group of Hamas fighters that are off to the side and you say, well, that's it. You've got no place here. I think it's pretty easy to say that anyone who has, clearly part not of Hamas, but of the military wing, which is the Al Hussein brigades, or of any other armed faction, they can't be involved in part of, governance of Palestine. That's obvious. I think if you talk about Hamas's political leadership, both in Gaza and in Qatar, I don't think they can be in positions. But what about the number of people who effectively help make the country run, who technically would be, quote, Hamas because they're part of the government? In other words, the equivalent of civil servants. Are you saying that all medical staff who have worked with Hamas, that you're going to disqualify them? Are you saying that you're going to disqualify all educators who have worked in what is a Hamas organized education ministry? Once you start talking about that, a very rough, and I emphasize a rough parallel here is when you say in Iraq post 2003 that anyone who had any link, even just simply because they had to have this to get employment with the Ba'ath Party of Saddam Hussein, that they were disqualified. Well, you see how well that worked out in Iraq. So again, when you turn principle into practice, you've got to be very, very shrewd here about getting people with skills into positions and not having the Israelis just point a finger and say, Hamas gone, Hamas, you're out of here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Professor Scott Lucas, for joining us and sharing your views in the debate. We'll take a short break and continue our discussion and focus on Pakistan's critical role in these developments. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the debate. We've been joined in the studios by senior analyst FARRUKH PITAFI to talk more about Pakistan's role with regards to the 20-point plan that Mr. Trump has put forward with reference to Gaza. Thank you, FARRUKH, for joining us. Your take on what exactly Pakistan can actually do in terms of its own geopolitical position and power, and the role that it can play in partnership with the US to actually implement this plan. Because in principle, of course, like many other countries, Pakistan has agreed and welcomed the plan. But when we talk about its implementation, what aspects are important to remember?
Right. Thank you very much for the question. I think that the most important thing that happened today was the foreign minister and deputy prime minister actually speaking to the press. And he said that this is clearly President Trump's plan. We have our own thoughts. So they, in principle, they're supporting it because it is the first initiative which actually seems to be tangible. But that doesn't mean that more room for negotiation does not exist. That is one aspect. Then he was asked about Pakistan's role, and he very clearly said that we still have to wait because a decision has not been taken, right? But I don't understand the skepticism that is there. I keep on listening to people earlier. Scott Lucas was also talking about these matters, and my question is, we keep on talking about other possible plans, right? What exactly is the other plan? Where exactly is the other plan? Without any coercive mechanism, there's hardly any chance of anything actually coming to fruition. And so far, what we have seen is that Israel has been actually killing people with impunity. That is not all. When you, the current state of affairs is concerned, the circumstances are clear. The circumstances are clear that people are still dying at this moment. When this war was started, at that time, there was no consultation with the people of Gaza. Hamas did not consult them. Israel did not consult them. And people are dying. Do we want to actually have this tree-beard-like dialogue where we endlessly keep on criticizing everything and don't see that more blood is being spilled? These are the important issues that one has to look at. Right now, there's only one person who can actually control Benjamin Netanyahu, and his name is Donald Trump. So right now, the plan on the table, and by the way, there was another inaccuracy that I have to point out, and that inaccuracy is that when you listen to this argument that Israel is not going to withdraw, they haven't read the entire plan. In the plan, there are two stages. The first is that they actually come to a demilitarization level, and they actually stay there. And IDF withdraws, and ISF actually takes over. And then what happens? Then this happens that IDF and both actually wait for the certain benchmarks, and then ISF and IDF actually negotiate and actually come up with an entire plan of withdrawal.
Yeah.
So it is the most concrete plan possible.
But what is Netanyahu's statement of not accepting a Palestinian state?
The fact is that Netanyahu is riding a tiger. He is riding a tiger. The moment war stops, that tiger is going to devour it. His own interior minister has said that the day war stops, we are going to bring him down, right? And that is not all. The victims or the hostages, the families of the hostages keep on saying that there has to be accountability. A, why did not you prioritize their rescue over this endless war? And then why did October 7 happen? If you look at all those things, the fact is the solution only lies in one thing, that you actually, and by the way, Netanyahu's habit is he will try to actually sully the ground and will keep on thrashing around and undercut it. But President Trump has shown yesterday that he can control the man and he can, make him concede. If that is so, and all the Arab world is actually behind it, Muslim countries are also behind the plan, what is the harm in it? At least war stops. And secondly, another inaccuracy that it does not support any two-state solution. There is a clear mention of it that you have to realize. And that is that once reforms have been carried out in accordance with the French and Saudi plan, which essentially is about two-state solution, which is essentially about recognizing state of Palestine. That once that benchmark is made, PA will take over. Palestinian Authority will take over the place, right? It is a clear-cut situation. Once it takes over, the state is established. And once that solution is there, you are practically talking about two-state solution. So all these inaccuracies, and sadly, unfortunately, everybody, I think that there has been so much bloodshed, everybody is angry, and they don't know where to take it out. And they are actually taking it out on something which is so concrete and which can deliver results. And at least today, if tomorrow President Trump has talked about 3-4 days, right? That Hamas has 3-4 days. At least in 3-4 days, bloodshed will stop if that happens. And people say, okay, the board is going to actually have non-representatives. Do you know when was the last Gaza election? It was 2006. This is 2025. Do you think that they still have the mandate? They did not consult people. They are going to face consequences. People have died. And now what you have to live with is those who are alive, 2 million people, they should get life back.
Right. And you mentioned a Palestinian Authority. What will that look like then?
When you look at the French and Saudi proposal, it actually talks about certain reforms, training their own forces, training their police force as well, and then certain benchmarks for transparency. Once those things are achieved, because one of the biggest allegations against Fatah was that they are financially not actually that much transparent. So transparency will come, certain benchmarks will be met, and then of course there's going to be an election. People are going to have inclusive government then, right? And the only point is that at this moment, what I do, what I get out of this, I get immediately the end of murder that is going on. Secondly, of course, those hostages, their bodies also come back home, and that is good news. They are human beings also. And finally, when you talk about two bad actors, Hamas and Netanyahu, both start facing consequences. Netanyahu is actually wanted in 3 corruption charges. Then these accountability issues that I pointed out. And then his own tiger, his own coalition, which is far right, will devour him. So there has to be some space for karma.
I know you mentioned that there is going to be an immediate end of hostility, but in terms of the rest of the plan to actually be put in place, do you think that it can be dragged on?
Like what? For example, ISF?
For example, giving it to the Palestinian Authority, for example, moving forward with the Israeli withdrawal. Do you think that that will be something that can be dragged on for long?
The first thing that will be clear is immediately you have cessation of hostilities permanent, right?
Yes.
And then IDF actually start, the moment ISF is commissioned, and one country has already volunteered, Indonesia, 20,000 troops, they have offered at the UN's forum. So once they have ISF, it goes in, and IDF withdraws, and then it minds its own border. Wherever it stands. But ISF is going to actually ensure that people get the kind of peace that is needed. Immediately what starts is access to all the resources that were being denied to the people, and immediately baseline infrastructure like water, like toilets, like shelter, these come, healthcare comes. And then finally what happens is that eventually once the organization is formed, and by the way, again, I'm glad that instead of Tony Blair being head of the board, it is President Trump who is actually going to head it, because had you actually nominated any person, an Arab, Palestinian, or anybody else, what would have happened immediately Netanyahu would have accused them of being, softer on Hamas, and immediately they would have started it again. Regarding Tony Blair also, I was critical, but then I listened to Steve Witkoff, and his assurance is correct. The man has spent 10 years in Jerusalem, especially as the special envoy. If they think that there is a benchmark of transparency, why not? The fact is, first of all, stop killing people. Kids are dying, women are dying, elderly are dying. Then second, provide them with some baseline food and some supplies, right? And finally, there is a structure that is there also. Entire world is agreeing to this. And all of a sudden, our plateaus and all these left-leaning intellectuals just keep on picking holes in it, punching holes in it. And the question is, if not this, what else? Who is going to bell the cat? Who is going to ask Netanyahu, stop?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Farrukh, and sharing these views with us. We'll take a short break and be back with a focus on what's going on in India. Welcome back. We'll take a closer look at what is going on in India, particularly, of course, the kind of security operation that we have seen occur with regards to firing that has been opened on September 24th. And this is, of course, very, very regrettable and has resulted in the loss of lives and the injuries to many. Important, of course, is also what has happened after that. There is no accountability, no dialogue, and we've seen that Ladakh groups have also refused to speak with the Home Ministry, saying that dialogue cannot be held at gunpoint. And that's an important aspect of how this is now going to be dealt with by the BJP. For that, we've been joined in the studios by senior analyst Raja Faisal. Thank you, Faisal, for being part of the discussion today. You know what's going on in Ladakh, and it's, of course, very, very regrettable, but perhaps something that we have not something that we haven't seen before. Unfortunately, in the way that it's being handled by the government, we know that the Ladakh groups have refused to speak, and there seems to be more finger pointing and blaming that is coming from the government instead of actually reconciliatory measures that can be taken. Where do you think that this will then evolve into, and whether or not this can create a serious problem for BJP?
It can, of course, raise the serious problems for BJP. Obviously, when we talk about these very protests, they are building up since 2019, since the abrogation of 370 and 35A, reason being the special status the Ladakh as a region had. That was gone, and after that, of course, the autonomy, any autonomy they had, it was snatched out of their hands. And now we know the people like Sonam Wangchuk, he was, of course, protesting, and alongside him, because he happens to be an engineer, because he happens to be a teacher as well. Remember the Three Idiots movie, in which there was famously Wangdu character? That was actually him in that character. And we also remember that there was Pangong Lake, where the last scene was filmized. But after, of course, Galwan 2020, the fight between India and China, of course, that lake is not with India anymore, and that is with China. But when it comes to Wangchuk is someone, Sonam Wangchuk has been, of course, protesting for the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which says that every side of India, they have their own culture, they have their own language that needs to be protected. And they want that. They don't want a direct rule by New Delhi, and they are, of course, protesting against it. When it comes to people like Wangchuk, they've been, of course, picked up from the homes, and elsewhere in India, they've been jailed out there. More than 60 people they have, of course, captured after that incident, in which, of course, people were torching the BJP head office in Leh. And there are only 2 districts in Ladakh, Leh and Kargil. Kargil is predominantly Muslim, and when we talk about Leh, of course, it is Buddhist. And now, when Leh was facing this, of course, Kargil is having the same problems. Traditionally, they always wanted to stay with the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because they believe that in terms of language as well as in terms of culture, they align themselves with the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So in this whole scenario, what has happened is that overall now the feel is very tense, and they believe the harsh-handedness by the Indian administration, harsh-handedness by the Indian military out there.
Yeah.
We all know that military has been increased after Galwan 2020
Yeah.
bout between China and India. With the increase of the military, even people like Wangchuk, they have been claiming that more the military is coming here, more the activity would be, and that is not going to be good for the climate of this region.
Absolutely.
And he has always been pivotal whenever he highlights that how to
Yeah.
protect the climate of that region. Overall, to me, I think this problem is going to stay, especially at a point when there is a very important election that is coming up in, of course, Bihar, and BJP is eyeing upon that. In the midst of that election, these kind of harsh-handedness by the center on these places, of course, it would be meaning a lot, because it entirely says that, of course, BJP that claims to be a democratic party is not a democratic party at all, because their harsh-handedness, it's more like, you know, we can simply say that it is a fascist rule of BJP.
Absolutely. Thank you very much,
Thank
Faisal,
you
for those views and making us and understand what really is going on. But there is so much that the youth of India are also speaking about, and I'd love for you to hear that as well. We know that there are many opinions that are coming out of within India, especially the young people and young activists saying a lot. And here's one such girl who's speaking about it.
My dear sisters, this video is about 9 years of Modi BJP government and what they've done for the women of our country. Every sentence Prime Minister Modi keeps saying Beti Bachao and women power is our superpower. But can any woman here forget what happened to the Manipur women few months back? They were paraded naked and they were gang raped in front of everybody. As a woman, can you forgive and forget that? How about the incident of our fellow sister Bilkis Bano? She was gang raped and her rapists were let out and celebrated by the BJP government. And our women wrestlers who went and got medal in Commonwealth and Olympic Games, they had to come and publicly protest against a sexual abuse against a BJP MP. But what did the BJP government do? Only safeguarded its MP and never gave voice for the women who protested. So repeatedly, sexual abuse and crimes have been happening in different parts of the state against the women, and the BJP government have been only supporting the rapists and never safeguarded the women of our country. And also, in our household, how much of a trouble are we facing because of this BJP government? Because of their lack of efficiency, they have raised our gas price up to 1,200 rupees. So imagine a lady from a middle class income just having gas cylinder at a price of 1,200. So repeatedly there have been atrocities against women in this BJP government. So if you are a woman, I think you have to think twice before voting for the BJP government.
This is the voice of the youth of India, and something to ponder over by the BJP, and of course has a huge impact on the politics of the country. But this is of course a matter of freedom of expression, that such voices actually move forward with putting out their opinions, something that is being curtailed in India very actively. We know that there is a recent Indian ruling as well that allows for arbitrary content removal to take place, and that is something that Musk has also responded to on X, saying that they will be appealing this particular order, and that of course puts the rights of people and the right to self-expression against what of course is allowed by the constitution, and of course what is allowed by the platform in itself, and absolutely disagreeing that they don't have the authority to speak on the matter. An important aspect of course to explore further, and for that we've been joined by legal expert Barrister Safi GHAURI. Thank you, Safi, for joining us in the debate today. Your views on what has happened in terms of the court ruling. How exactly do you think that such content removal, which is arbitrary nature, does not ask for any sort of legal regulation or step to be taken prior to that, really will be affecting the lives of the people and their freedom of expression?
Look at the mechanism of what India has requested, you will find it to be one of the most chilling Orwellian things that could have happened. And sort of harkens us back to those authoritarian regimes that we probably read of in novels. And what India now has done is that instead of any like any other country, the way they sort of complain when they have a problem with any particular tweet and they want it to be taken down, then there's a judicial process. Somebody needs to explain why that tweet is misleading. Maybe it is promoting hatred, and then that gets taken down. Instead, now what they've done is they've created a secret portal, which is called SAFI. This secret portal is connected directly to the Indian police and an ordinary police officer, and there are 2 million of such police officers all across India. All of them have direct access to that portal, and they can secretly, this is a secret portal, mind you, so they can secretly just look at any tweet they want, they can click on it, and X has to remove it right then and there. This is the first time this has happened. Like even in the most censored countries in the world that people speak of, like North Korea, we don't hear of such things. And so now what the police is doing is not only is it taking the identities of all of those people who are tweeting, they're also secretly taking down those posts and making absolute records of what has happened. So understandably, now here's where it gets really interesting. Understandably, X went to the Karnataka High Court where this portal, Sci-Hawk portal, is being made, and they filed a petition, and the High Court decided that this was for the public good and it is going to really be a positive step by the government of India, and so the X should follow along. Now, obviously, X is going to appeal that, and it is completely unconstitutional as per the Constitution of India itself. Article 19 of the Indian Constitution clearly states that there's going to be freedom of expression. But here, you are not only curtailing the freedom of expression, you are doing so in a sinister manner. You are doing it secretly whilst taking records of anyone who's speaking against you. So the impact, as you can imagine, is that not only is it deeply concerning for the freedom of expression, but everybody who's going to now talk, will have to think 10 times about what's happening, because now the government will know who you are and they will keep a record of you, and then they can come after you like they have come after everyone in Kashmir. It's important to realize that, Sana,
Right.
that
Absolutely
India has
understand
done
that.
this in the past.
It
Yes.
has, but Barrister Safi, I also want to understand where exactly is the room for X to actually appeal this, and whether or not, when we talk about such platforms also following the rules of the country that they're operating in, or having to abide by the court rulings, where is the room for them to be able to defend this case?
No, I think as far as X is concerned, X is very clear on its free speech absolutism. X has, Pakistan banned X, as we very well know. X did not, bend the knee, so to speak, with Pakistan. It was banned in Brazil temporarily as well for a variety of matters. Did not do so. So Elon Musk has been very clear on the idea that they're going to be free speech absolutists. And obviously, if they start integrating with individual countries and their secret portals, then they are just a public functionary. Then they are just an extension of the government. Then they are in no manner an external service that is allowing people a free marketplace of ideas where people can come and discuss things. But what I find very surprising is the fact that Indians who are presently going through all of this, Indians who are perhaps the most active audience on X, are not doing anything about it. They think it's all right, and they're just sort of playing along, which sort of makes me really question what level of deprivation and what level of brainwashing they've actually gone through for them to be giving up their freedom so easily.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Barrister Safi Lahori, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Here's the crux of what we spoke about in the debate today. We looked at, of course, Trump's 20-point plan, which is very, very important and, of course, is being welcomed by international partners, including Pakistan. But there are key challenges that remain in its implementation. There is, of course, a concern as to what is going on within India, particularly when we talk about unrest in Ladakh. But what is, of course, also more important is that there is no accountability as to what the BJP decides to move forward, as is obvious by the recent court ruling in India that allows for arbitrary content removal. What happens next, of course, remains to be seen, but we'll be here to talk about it. That's all we have from the debate today. We'll now see you tomorrow.